Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar, our first webinar of 2016. It is Monday, January 4th. Hope you had a happy and safe New Year's. I don't know what brings more people in. I don't know if it's the title, but we have quite a number tonight watching the webinar. And I assume that's because relapse and regression is such a concern, and I assume it's also everybody's attempt to try to stem the tide, to try to, what can I do to contribute to that not happening in my child? And so we'll talk about that as we go along tonight. So let's talk about regression. Regression, in therapeutic terms, can be seen as moving to a more primitive state of feeling and of coping. I think it's especially a wonderful time of year to talk about that because I think a lot of people can experience the holidays as a regressive time, right? It's that time when you get together with family and you find yourself behaving, feeling, and thinking in old ways, in ways that you felt when you were younger. And so that's some way that we can relate, and that's a feeling. When we think about therapeutic regression, we think about it happening during times of stress, right? Anytime there is a transition. I can't tell you how many times I sit in a parent support group and I hear people talking about, wanting to learn about how do we navigate transitions. The first thing that I would say is give yourself a little slack. Under any kind of stress, any kind of pressure, our coping skills are going to be put to the test. So if we can know that, if we can have compassion with ourselves, we're less likely to react in a knee-jerk kind of way. So it can happen during times of stress, and we're almost all going through times of transition in our life, no matter where we are in our life. I've used this analogy over the years many times, and it is to say that when we learn how to juggle 3 balls, and then 2 balls are added to us, or a new ball or a new object is handed to us to juggle, we're going to struggle. That doesn't mean overall that we've lost our therapeutic gain. That means that because new stress, new options, new triggers are present, we're going to have challenges. So again, it's important to change the way that we think about our struggles and our challenges to be able to navigate them a little bit better. And I think for parents, when you think about your child regressing, I can't say this strong enough, but your ability to respond to it with as much contained anxiety, right? Managing your own anxiety, managing your own frustration, not regressing back to knee-jerk or black and white thinking. It's not all or nothing. It's not 0 or 100, right? There is a different quality to regression later because it comes in the context, like I said, oftentimes of greater stress, more temptation, and more choices. When I think about the idea of regression, I think about the fact that when under stress, we know this from sports psychology, we resort to things that feel comfortable, even if they're not ideal or healthy for us, right? When we feel uncomfortable, when we feel anxious, we are tempted to regress back to a place that is more comfortable. That is why a newly learned skill, a newly acquired skill in any part of our life is oftentimes the first thing to go when stress increases. More choices are more difficult. That's why, folks, in treatment, and I say this for all of the good of it and all of the not so good of it, in treatment, clients and students often do very well. Right? They do better than they do out of treatment. That doesn't necessarily mean that we keep them in treatment forever, but that we understand that part of that is fewer choices. Maybe that's something we can hear as parents, because I think a lot of times we think of rewarding our children with choices, right? Especially because they complain about trust. But sometimes more choices aren't necessarily something that they are ready for. You know, it's like a math test. Parents will say to me, or young people will say to me, but if I'm going to be tested, if I'm eventually going to have that challenge, why not have it now? But that's like saying, I'm eventually going to have to take the math test, the math final, so why don't I have it right now? Well, there's a reason. Because we need more practice, more instruction, more experience in the math that's going to be tested later to be able to be successful with it. Part of what we're doing is we're experimenting. When there's this level of structure, right? This box is small. There's less opportunity to experiment. And so when the box gets larger, we're going to experiment. That requires us as parents to see the value in the struggle. I want to say this to all of you. You're not necessarily back where you were before. Some of you who would say, well, my head was in the sand, right? I was in denial. I didn't have my eye on the ball, and things got much worse than I thought. As you acquire new skills and new insight and new awareness in this whole process, you don't need to go back to that place to allow for some struggle, to appreciate the mistakes and the value that they add to the learning experience. I often believe that the greatest way that we learn is to experience the futility of our old ways of coping, right? We have to make sure that that road that we think leads somewhere is a dead end. And sometimes we try it more than once. And so again, the more as parents we can stay present, stay non-reactive, steer away from black and white, all or nothing thinking, the more capable we are of providing an environment where our child can learn from it, can feel safe. A lot of parents will say during the reuniting phase of therapy, whether it be at our program or the subsequent program, they'll say, I thought we'd move past all this. And I'll tell you, in the context of therapy you had, this particular behavior, this particular request or belief on your child's part, but with your presence, they are inclined to say, are you sure about this? Can I not press against this? I know we settled this on phone calls or in letters or during that first home visit, but are you sure? And so it's going to ask of you folks. That's the hard, the ugly, but what I think is the beautiful truth of this. It's going to ask of you to maintain your boundaries. It's going to test you in this process. Regression is a part of progress. That's another aspect of that idea of looking at it from a more complete picture. One of the greatest challenges that people will talk about is the regression and relapse. When we talk about that, is that if we talk about it being a normal part of progress, that we're giving permission to the individual to relapse, to go backwards. It's not that way for somebody who's healthy. Somebody who is not healthy, who doesn't want to work, who doesn't want to make progress, do the hard work, isn't ready for it, they're going to use anything for an excuse, right? So if you don't talk about regression, if you don't talk about relapse as a part of the process, they're going to find some other excuse. So it's not, we ought not to steer away from that. We ought not to make it part of our language and our understanding just because some people are going to use it as an excuse, right? So I would encourage you not to necessarily eradicate it from your concept of progress, because some people will use it as an excuse. Like I said, regression is a psychological state of returning to a less sophisticated manner of coping. Often comes from a younger feeling. Sometimes when we have those anxious moments at 4 o'clock in the morning when you wake up, that's a regressive moment. Or during the holidays, during celebrations, annual celebrations, those can be regressive, what my therapist calls elevator days, because we move way down in our level of functioning and our level of being. Sometimes they'll talk about it in terms of being tired, hungry, and sick, right? When we are depleted in some way, we are more prone to regression. We're more apt to regress. Similar to relapse, which is mostly seen as an acute event, oftentimes associated with drug and alcohol, or other acute behaviors like cutting, like suicidal thinking, like maybe around eating issues, right? We think of relapse as a more acute event. Again, it's a part of recovery. It doesn't necessarily need to be an excuse, but we need to understand and learn how to deal and respond to it when it comes. That we get curious, that we get interested, that we watch, that we learn. Not every relapse is equal, right? Some of them, like I talk about later on these bullet points, some of them I like to think about in terms of flare-ups. A full-blown relapse or regressive episode is when all of the thinking goes back to an earlier phase of progress, when motivation is lost, right? When there's not a learning experience that comes out of it. I love this story because for me, I think it illustrates a classic dynamic between parent and child. And it is this. This is a true story of a father who told me this years ago. His son had come to our program, had really come in a very fragile and raw state, and had made a tremendous amount of progress with us. It was a challenge for the parents to stay strong in the early part of the program, but they did it. We had to do some extra things to support them, and they eventually did it. And their son made remarkable progress, saying some of the most mature things toward the end of the program. They made the decision. He was on the younger end of of the ages that we deal with, they made the decision to take him back home. And they set up a behavioral contract, and they set up an expectation that if it got back to where it was or near where it was, that they would re-engage him in wilderness therapy or maybe to a therapeutic placement, a longer-term placement. And so I was supportive of that. In the context of that, they hired me on to be their parent coach, and I did several sessions with them. I remember as things started to unravel several months in, I was doing a phone call with the father, and he said, you know what, Brad? I was so frustrated the other day with Billy. It wasn't the boy's name, but we'll call him Billy. I was so frustrated with Billy the other day that I went upstairs. I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I was watching Billy make the same mistakes, knowing that the consequence in the contract was that he was going to go back to wilderness or a therapeutic school. So I went up to him and I said, I can't understand why you're doing what you know you're not supposed to be doing. And I paused and I said to the father, did you hear what you just said? You said to me, Brad, I know I'm not supposed to yell and lecture, but I went and did it anyway. And my lecture was about, I can't believe you're doing the thing that you know you're not supposed to be doing. So in the very act of questioning and being confused and challenging his child with his regression, he himself was regressing. And so what we said is, you know very well, because you just did it yourself. So what I want you to do is I want you to go to him and tell him that you figured it out because you yourself did it. Offer him that vulnerability. Offer him your awareness of how difficult it is to maintain gains. While we know in our heads, we know the right thing, for lack of a better word, we still can gravitate toward what feels most comfortable to us, even though we know it's unhealthy. Like I said, steering away from the addictive thing, turning relapse into a catastrophe, right? That goes on the part of both the parent, of the family member, and of the person experiencing the relapse, right? And we can contribute to them by being calm, by looking at it, by owning our anxiety and our fears, our sadness, our expectations, our frustration, right? That's ours. And if we can't, this is important, if we cannot stay present with the other person in this way, in this healthy way, then we need to go somewhere else and get help. Go to our therapist, go to our sponsor, go to a friend. Because to dump or unload all of that anxiety on our child does not help them. And that's for us, right? That's taking care of us at their expense. So we need to encourage it, and ideally the individual going through the relapse needs to steer away from the addictive thinking. It's part of learning lessons. There's a difference, like I described, between a relapse and a flare-up. You know, a lot of your children, this is something that I know, and like I said, I've been doing this for now 20 years. This is a time for us to recognize that sometimes our skills lie dormant, right? Sometimes they don't show up, but they're there, right? And we can have that kind of confidence. And sometimes they go dormant for a long period of time. But I think what doing all of these interventions that you folks have done can give to you, if you allow it, it can give you the confidence that I provided you something wonderful. I provided you something significant. I've done the best that I can. And you don't know if it's perfect. You don't know if you've made every decision perfectly, but you've done a significant amount. You've contributed something substantial to your child. And sometimes those skills, those insights lie dormant. I have lots of experiences where children seem to have, for a period of time, lost everything that they learned in the program. And years later, I've had discussions with them where they say, I remember specific conversations. I remember what it was like during my impact letter group. I remember what you said to me in one session. I remember what the staff taught me. I remember my experience. We learn our triggers. You know, that's an important thing to recognize during a regressive period or a relapse moment, is to learn our triggers. I can't walk into a bar. I can't hang out with those old friends. I can't drink socially. I can't be around negative thinking people. I can't be around that particular person, right? When I get tired, I am vulnerable. When I take on too much, I am vulnerable. When I don't take care of myself and I extend myself too far, I'm vulnerable. So we start to learn our triggers. And then we reassess maintenance and support strategies. How am I going to steer away from that? This goes back to that idea about boundaries in general. Instead of getting mad at everybody else, the ideal is for me to say, that's about me. What do I need to do to take care of myself better? Because this isn't working for me. I'm ending up angry and resentful and acting out in these ways. I'm eating too much. I'm drinking too much. I'm being mean. Whatever it is that is your drug of choice, When you find yourself doing that, you can look back inside and say, okay, how can I take care of myself? Because these are unhealthy, maladaptive ways to take care of me. So I need to reevaluate everything. Like I said, this whole experience can give you some confidence if you allow it, that you provided them with something that you know that they know now. You know that they have exposure and experience with it. Common regressions that we've seen are in the initial phase of our program and the next program. Each time there's a transition, we can see regression, right? It's that mindset that human beings get into where we think of arriving, right? I've arrived, I've completed. Sometimes it's an external event like a parent visit, a peer leaving, a test coming up, letter, assignment, girlfriend, boyfriend issues, other trigger, upcoming positive anticipated event. All of those things can be moments where we're going to experience some regression, some relapse behaviors. Coming close to discharge. After home, after a honeymoon period, there's often a period of regression. And then that can move into recovery and maintenance, right? We like for regression to happen during the program, right? Years ago, I was really proud of everything we did, loved patting ourselves on the back, because many of our clients and students left at the peak of their growth, right? We looked great. The next program, not so much. Home, not so much sometimes. But that's not realistic. I think we have to get over that hump, that peak. We have to get past that really steep trajectory and get to that leveling off, even to that dip. I want in treatment for clients to experience regression. Now, what's that going to look like? That's going to look like them saying, I'm bored. I've learned everything that I can. I've reached the point of diminishing returns. I've learned everything. I can do this at home, right? There's going to be those list of things that they say that are just their way of saying, this is uncomfortable. I don't know how to navigate this particular stage. But what I love about those stages of the program where there's that leveling off or that curve down is that's a lot more like real life. The rush, the uniqueness, the newness of it is gone, has passed, and now I have to deal with Tuesdays and Wednesdays that aren't that fantastic, that aren't that novel. And for young adults and adolescents specifically, novelty is a big deal. Their brains require a lot more novelty for them to experience a rush, a sense of well-being, versus an older adult with a different brain development. We can experience that from having a piece of pie, or from sitting down in front of the fire and reading a good book, or taking a nap on a Sunday afternoon. That doesn't fly for the adolescent and the young adult. So they're going to require more novelty. So it's okay. We like for them to experience at least one regressive relapse episode during the program. And I say this to parents all the time. I don't learn a ton when a child regresses or relapses. Almost never. Even when it's fairly significant. Because I didn't get so attached to their progress that I didn't think that they were past it. I knew this was a long-term process. Parents hold on very, very tightly. They see wonderful surges, wonderful improvement, wonderful moments, insight. They hold on to that stuff, right? The highs become so high for them. They get attached. They come to parent support groups and parent meetings and they say, it's wonderful. He's got a job. She's doing well in school. And my response is, we'll see. Like this is a long process. This is a long journey. This is a long book. And we're on an early chapter, ideally. So let's take a step back. Not just from the negatives, like I was mentioning earlier, but from the positives. That's why I say the highs aren't that high and the lows aren't that low. But as parents, I think we hang on too tightly. We observe too closely. I remember years ago, I was talking to the parents of a young adult who was at a sober living environment somewhere back east. And they were describing, I got on my weekly phone call with them. I was doing some parent coaching. And they said, okay, so this is how his day was on Saturday. And then midday Saturday, he had it down. And then he had a great time at a social Saturday night. And then Sunday, he was really bored. And they listed about 3 or 4 days in a row. And they had examples of his mood shift from day to day, from part of the day to part of the day for the last 3 days. And I said to him, I said, you shouldn't know that much. Right? It's not healthy for you. And I guarantee whatever you're communicating to him in regard to this, in the context of this, is not necessarily helpful for him. So take a step back. That's why in the care of professionals, you can not abdicate responsibility, but you can let them do some of the heavy lifting. You can let them do some of the accountability work, some of the challenging, some of the questioning. Because we as professionals, just as if my children were in treatment, we as professionals are more objective. We have some emotional distance. We don't love them as much as you love them. That can never be true. But oftentimes we can have greater clarity. Because greater love doesn't necessarily translate into as greater clarity as most of all of us know. Like I said, we want to see it happen during the program. It happens at each new level of care, right? We prepare. I like to prepare families for those letters. I like to prepare them for that next challenge, that next level of care. And this is for some people, this is a multi-year process for them, right? Even for those of you who have young adult children in this process, who have been through our intervention, maybe even others, you know this is a long, pace yourself. This is a marathon. And the relationship you have, I'm going to say this very slowly and very intentionally, the relationship you have with your child and their struggles is your responsibility. I'll say that again. The relationship that you have with your child and their struggles is your responsibility. Are you obsessed with fixing it? Do you feel blame? Are you overly anxious and involved in it? Do you try to rescue it? Do you try to fix that relationship that you have? How you think about it, how you interact around the issue, that's your responsibility. One of the things that happens in all of our programs is you get insulated, especially at our program. At Evoke, you get insulated from the day-to-day struggles, right? That's just natural. The natural part of the structure of wellness therapy is there's some insulation, right? You get letters once a week. You get phone calls as you move along. You have visits during the program. But that insulation can be helpful for both of you. I think I've told this story on this webinar, maybe not for some time now. My oldest child, now in his young 20s, he was going away for a couple of years. And I was sad, grieving. He was going on a service mission to do something, and I was going to have very little contact with him for 2 years. And I remember sitting in therapy on a Friday, and he was going to be going in the following Tuesday or Wednesday. Toward the end of my therapy session, I said, I'm so sad. He's my firstborn, and I don't have words, I said to my therapist, to express to him how much I love him, and tears started running down my face. I hadn't planned on talking about this, but it just came up at the end of the session. And my therapist said, he knows how you feel about him. And I was comforted by that and thought, he does know. There's nothing new that I can tell him before he leaves. And then she said, and he needs to get as far away from you as he can. And I laughed, and I was immediately relieved. And I realized the truth of that. Nobody will ever love my children more than I will. Their mother will tie me for it, but nobody will love them more. But part of what is going to be beneficial for both of us and terrifying for both of us is that distance that will provide an opportunity for individuation for them and for me to some extent. So that's an important part of this idea of detachment. And sometimes how that insulation can be created in a program, but also gets created as they progress in phases of life. I like to encourage parents to steer away from expressing pride in your children, because then they can disappoint. I don't have the inclination. I don't have the inclination to be disappointed for sure in my children. I once in a while have the inclination to be proud of my children. But what I don't want is I don't want it to be about me. I don't want my peace, my serenity, my feeling of pride, whatever that means, to be about me. They're not out there to live my life for me. They're not out there to reflect on me. They're not out there to impress me or make me proud. They're out there to live their life, to figure it out, to find themselves, to find their passion, to find love, right? To develop their gifts, to make the world a better place, and find their place in it. And that has very little to do with me. It definitely isn't a reflection of me. And so I warn you against the phrases of I feel proud or I feel disappointed. Because that can weigh very heavily, both can weigh very heavily on our children. When your children leave Evoke, and for some of you that's happened some time ago, the new program is going to be a challenge for them. Right? They're going to say all of those things. I can think of this at every level of care, right? I figured it out. I don't need this anymore. And most of the time, they're lying to themselves. Most of the time, they just, it's human nature to just want freedom, even if that freedom is going to cause us to be exposed to choices and opportunities that are going to be dangerous and harmful. So you get to make a decision about what you feel comfortable supporting. With adolescents, with pre-adults, you get to make some pretty big unilateral decisions. And with young adults, the question always is this. I will say this very clearly. This is important. What do you feel comfortable with? Right? That's the change in language that I invite you to use. This is what I feel comfortable supporting. You don't have to make it right. You don't have to justify it. That made me think of, I don't know if any of you saw the interview between Jerry Seinfeld and President Obama the other day. But if you haven't, you can Google it. Comedians in Cars with Coffee with Seinfeld, and he interviews Obama. Jerry's asking him a bunch of daily life questions, and he's saying, so what's it like for you when you wake up in the morning? And Obama explains, I wake up in the morning, I shower, I shave, I put on some athletic, and I go exercise. And Jerry says, wait, you shave before you exercise? And then Obama says, yeah, I do, because I like to do it that way and I don't have to justify it, right? And I know that's a small, silly example, but we don't have to justify it. We just get to feel comfortable with what we feel comfortable with. And you get to support what you get to support. If you start communicating in such a way to justify it, to make it right, you're going to open yourself up to endless amounts of debate. You're going to open yourself up to the discussion of who's right and who's wrong. You're going to open yourself up to the discussion about this is what I need to do to fix you. All of those are dead ends. So the question is, this is what I feel comfortable with right now. And I might be wrong. I might be crazy. But this is what I feel comfortable with. Watch out for the honeymoon period. Again, try to shave off the peaks and the valleys, right? Not to numb yourselves out, but have enough distance, have enough detachment that you can have the clarity to see that they're really not that high and they're really not that low. You're going to experience it. Your child's going to experience it. When you get to the new program, I will tell you, it's a different level of customer service. It's a different level of care. It's a different level of intensity. So you're going to adjust to that. And that's going to be adjustment for all of you. It's more like real. Each level of care as we step down is less supportive, right? Wellness therapy in some ways is the easiest. Physically, it can be demanding, right? There's some creature comforts, no doubt, that are more demanding. But level of care, level of support, that is at its highest in our program. And as you move down the level of care, you're going to have more real-life experiences. There's going to be a slower pace of progress. It's going to be less exciting. Less diagnostic material is going to be coming in. You're going to get that letter, that response that this is the wrong place. Old behavior is going to creep up. If you maintain your ground, if you do your work, right? If you stay out of those potholes, you're going to have a chance at making those behavioral detours shorter and shorter. At least you're going to have an opportunity to contribute to it in that way. Don't be surprised as you go along to hear new disclosures. And sometimes people will say, well, that wasn't, he didn't say everything. Of course he didn't. We don't see the truth come up like a light bulb coming up. It's like the sun rising on the horizon. It comes up bit by bit. I would say in the best case scenarios, my students that I am impressed with, beyond belief, they do 70% of the disclosing, of the bringing forth and telling the truth about themselves during our program. That's the best. And of course, we bring it down from there, and sometimes it's 50 and 40%. This is a start. This is an orientation phase. This is a reference point. This is a new watermark to measure against. But there's a lot of work going forward, no matter what the level of care following Evoke is. Be wary of manipulation coming home. It'll capitalize on your doubts and your adjustment to the next legs. If you ever, this is for a specific niche of you, if you're leaving Evoke and you're tempted to pull your child from treatment because you're not seeing what you need to see, this is my suggestion. Change programs. Don't take them home. Change programs. Right? If it's not a good fit, of course, the agenda, the hope is going to be they come home on their parts, almost all of their parts. But if it's the wrong place, then find the right place. I think when the choice becomes this program or one that's fairly equivalent but different, when that becomes the option, there's less motivation on the child's part. And you'll start to see the agenda more clearly. And what you'll see is an improvement afterwards. When you can tolerate, right, when you can go through that difficult period at the next step, you'll see improvement following. At home, you'll see a similar pattern of honeymoon. You'll see a testing of the limits, right? They have to test you face to face, like I said earlier, right? You'll see the experimentation. Have solid aftercare plans that get started. If your child is going to become home after a vote, start all of your work now. Get your therapist, get your family therapist, go to your Al-Anon meetings, your Coda-Need meetings. Get all of that started in week 2, right? Just rush into that and have that and follow through. Be still, slow down, and endure it. That is, if you can slow down, that's one of the greatest contributions you can make to this entire process. React slowly. Take your time. Act as if your children were, I used to say this joke to parents. I used to say, we told your child to relapse or regress when they got home because we thought it would be important for you to test your new skill sets. Now, obviously, we don't really say that. But if you think like that, if you just play that little game in your head, you'll realize this is not a test of them. This is a test of you. If you can shift your thinking from this is a test of me as much as it's a test of your child, I cannot tell you how positively that kind of thinking will contribute to the overall progress of your family. Stop expecting them to change, right? Expecting anybody else to change. What I suggest to people is assume nobody in your family, your co-parent, your children are going to change. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And if what you're going to do is going to continue to try to change them, that's not quite what we're talking about. The healthiest I am is when I look at what I can do to change this. But when I get angry and frustrated because my 22-year-old still acting like a 22-year-old, or my 21-year-old still acting like a 21-year-old, or my 13-year-old still acting like a 13-year-old, that's when I get crazy. When I see my wife doing things and I get frustrated instead of saying, what do I need to do to take care of myself in this relationship? Right? I'm in charge. I'm responsible for taking care of me, not anybody else. What do I need to do? So practice that detachment where it's not your job to change anybody else, it's your job to change you. Stop the black and white thinking. It's one of the most consistent things that we hear from families that contributes to their health and function versus dysfunction. Focus on your response. Make that the emphasis, not your child's response. Focus on your regression and relapse. What can you do to control? If you focus on what you can control, you'll feel more empowered. Not without challenge, but less anxious or depressed. Take it a day at a time. Start to recognize your triggers and behaviors. When parents come to me and talk about wonderful changes in their children and how excited they are, I'm always concerned. However, I'm not concerned when a parent comes to me and said, well, my child is doing this, this, and this, but I'll tell you what I'm learning to do. I'm learning to respond differently. I had a phone call last week where I said something different. He told me something on the phone, or she told me on the phone. Normally I would have reacted this way, but instead I reacted that way. That's when I have hope. Similar to the way that I would feel when a child is talking to me, if they're talking about their change and not their parents' change. Go to support groups, go to therapy, individual, family. Get help. Do the work. Get on your journey. If there's one thing that you can do that can contribute to the maintaining of the gains that happen in all these therapeutic settings, it is simply to be married to be in love with, to be passionate about your work. You're not going to be perfect. You're going to lose focus. You're going to get distracted. You're going to have bad days, bad weeks, bad months. But if overall you become obsessed with what can I do versus what can other people do and how are they faring, you're going to find yourself to be much more at peace and serene, much more clear, much more capable, a much healthier contributor to the family system health. All right, we have time for live questions that are topic related, and then later on I'll have questions that are off topic. So Michael, I'm ready to take any of those. My son was home over the holidays for the first extended visit. He basically spent the whole time in his room checked out with his electronics. I found it difficult to allow him to be and experience him home in this way and overcome the urge to intervene with an unhealthy behavior. How do I simultaneously stay both emotionally connected and detached from his behavior? What is my role in helping him figure it out? I recognize ultimately he has to figure it out, and it's not my job. It goes back to the idea, this phrase of what do you feel comfortable with? That's a hard one because there's part of him that he's indulging himself, right? He's binging on what he's not been allowed to do for some time now. And it's not very impressive. It's not very high functioning. It's not very enlightening. It's not very social. It's not very aware. And so my question would be, what do you feel comfortable with? I don't feel comfortable with this. I'm not, and I don't know his age. I don't know if he's a young adult. That would lead you to feel very differently than if he was 14 or 15 or 16. So the question is, you get to decide based on your comfort level. I don't feel comfortable with you spending that much time in your room, so here's going to be my boundary. This is my boundary. Well, you know what? I'm sorry. I don't feel comfortable. You can also ask questions and have a dialogue around it. But if it gets defensive or it devolves into who's right and who's wrong, just retreat back to this is my comfort level. This is my boundary. And I might be wrong. And I might be trying to control you. And I might be obsessed. I don't know. I'm going to look at that. I'm going to talk to people. But this is what I feel comfortable with at this point. And again, that ideally is going to be different for a 14-year-old to a 21-year-old, right? There's going to be different levels of comfort you have. Different levels of autonomy that you provide for him. So that's a normal response that you had. And it's not easy. And he might binge himself right back into old behaviors. And then you would learn something. And then he has the opportunity to learn something. And you would learn something about your boundary. And you wouldn't be wrong, and hopefully no therapist or parent coach would beat you up over it. They would say, so what did you learn? What do you think now? Because we're all learning as we go, right? So the main question is, what do you feel comfortable with? And then you get to set a boundary based on that. What unique value can an aftercare program provide? Practice, right? Speaking in terms of our neurology, it can continue to lay down and set healthy pathways in the brain away from old addictive behaviors, depressive behavior, anxious behaviors, acting out behaviors, right? So it's just practice. Length of stay in treatment is one of the predictors, one of the greatest predictors of maintaining gains. So as much as anything, it is practice. It is experimenting with a safety net also, right? The safety net is a little bit more protective than it is at home or out there in the world if we're talking about a young adult. So I would say practice and then experimentation with a safety net would be the two things that specifically that aftercare, therapeutic settings after a primary level of care like ours provide. Would you suggest a different environment when a child returns, meaning the different town or school? I don't think that in and of itself is a solution. I think that can be a part of helping children that are already doing well and already committed to change. I think that can be very helpful. But sometimes parents think about that or talk about that as the solution. So that's where I would draw the line. It can be a part of an overall plan, but let me just say it this way. If the other pieces aren't in place, that is, the other aftercare features, whatever that is, whatever the family and the child is doing for support and therapy, rules and boundaries, if all that stuff isn't in place, your child walking into a new town in a different school is going to find the exact same friend. But if in the context of everything else that's going on to support the changes, this is one part of it, I do believe it can be helpful. But it sometimes is overvalued as the sole predictor. And by the way, my experience is that when a person is ready to change, they choose different playgrounds and playmates, right? It's not hard to learn it when you really, really want to change. That was my experience as a teenager. When I was ready to change, my playmates and playgrounds changed immediately and nobody had to tell me to do it. I knew it. So, but sometimes people don't know and they think they can be with the same playground and playmates and it's going to work out. But that's why I say it's a part of the equation, but it is not. It's not the defining feature of the equation. It's more evidence of the change than it is the cause of the change. And so I think for children, that means that they're going to be on board with that and understand that and even appreciate that. If I live on the East Coast and my son is at Avoca in Utah, how do I find the right educational counselor to help me find the right placement for him after wilderness? Talk to your wilderness therapist. Talk to your admissions counselor. They should and can and will help guide you with that. So talk to them and they'll connect you with somebody that they've worked with, that they have a good relationship with, that they trust, and then they'll be able to create a bridge for you from there to where you're at. Absolutely. Best way to do it. We work nationally. I mean, I know as many people in New York City than I in Los Angeles and San Francisco and Chicago. I know more people in those areas than I do in Salt Lake City, where I live. Can you explain the various levels of aftercare? There's a webinar on how to choose the best fit aftercare, and I won't take too long, but I'll tell you that ours is considered primary care. Then there's residential treatment centers, which are a pretty high level of care. There's therapeutic schools. There's group homes. That's lower level. There's sober living environment. That's around sobriety, of course, and not a lot of programming, right? There's addiction treatment facilities, and that also is. Sometimes people will go from us to them. So there's a whole host of them that you can become acquainted with. So watch the webinar on how to choose the best fit program. Talk to your Evoke counselor. Talk to your educational consultant or counselor, and they can help you with that. So I'll just mention that briefly and just say that there's that resource. It's something if you're interested in. Watch that webinar for sure. My daughter's 18 and now home. She has no motivation to do anything other than play video games. She has dropped out of school and isn't working. How do I hold a boundary when she keeps breaking every rule I set, like don't drink or use drugs, stay on your meds, etc.? Do I really tell her to leave the home and maybe have her living on the street doing illegal activities for money? I can't give you advice about what to do in this situation, except for I can encourage you to engage in a process. You need to be talking to a therapist, a parent coach. You need to be going to Al-Anon and CODA, right? Those are the things that you need to be doing to taking care of yourself, to give you clarity to make the decision, because these are important decisions. But if you're being held hostage by her, right? If you are being held hostage by the fact that if you can't set a boundary to take care of yourself with what you feel comfortable with, like I said earlier, because it's going to get worse, then you're not doing either one of you any good. She's really parenting you. So get support, engage parent coaches, mentors, sponsors, and therapists so that you can come to this conclusion with confidence. Because I will tell you this, you could make the decision to say you can't live here if you do this. You could make that decision. And she could end up going out of the house and doing something very, very harmful. Right? The worst possible thing can happen. And you could also let her stay in the home, further enable the behavior, contribute to greater and greater addiction that could lead to the worst possible thing. Right? So if you're being held hostage by I've got to make the perfectly right decision because I'm in charge of whether she does bad or not, or good or not, or lives or not, you're in trouble. Right? You're off. You're in a dance that you can't win. You're in a relationship with her and your problems that you can't win. This is not easy. No therapist, no matter how experienced they are, should tell you what to do, but they should engage you in a process for you to find your truth and to come at it courageously and honestly and authentically. And it's going to be risky no matter what you do because you can't control her. She right now is in fact controlling you. So that's my answer to that question. I hope that helps, but I'm clear about that. I understand that practice is important, but how do you find the balance between that and an adolescent feeling institutionalized, the identified patient? Well, you don't control how they feel, right? You're not in control. You're only in control of your truth, of making the best decision you can. The phrase feeling institutionalized, I was in treatment. Lots of kids have been in treatment. I have therapists, staff members that were in years of treatment. And some of them are the least institutionalized people I've ever met in my life. There are people who went through public school and no treatment who are more institutionalized. It's if you get good treatment and if you're involved in the process, you get healthier. That's the answer. But if you're in charge of how your child feels, you'll never win. You can't be in charge of whether your child feels loved. You can't be in charge of whether your child feels institutionalized. They'll tell you you can. They'll blame you for how they feel. And even though you'll argue to the end of the day that you don't want them to blame you, you'll react as if you need to justify it. So you can't control whether a child loves you, but you can't whether a child feels loved. But you can be in charge of whether you love a child. You can't be in charge of whether the child feels like an identified patient. But you can be in charge of making the most honest, authentic, courageous decision that you can make. The best way that I could encourage you to help your child not feel that way, the best contribution you can make to it is do your work. Come to an intensive. You get involved in Al-Anon. You get involved in codependency. You go to family therapy. You need help. That response that parents have where they say, why would I go to therapy? This is my child's problem. They're the one that's in the addict. They're the ones that's got the problem. That's what makes them feel institutionalized and identified patient-like. So come to an intensive. Go to our workshop. Go to Al-Anon. Go to CODA. Go to therapy. And become a part of the process. And show up with your insecurities, with your mistakes, with your honesty, with your authenticity, with your not having all the answers. Show up with your vulnerable self. And then your child will feel like they're not the only one. And then they'll feel connected. And then they'll feel like the pressure's off them. And then they won't feel like the spotlight and the microscope is on them. That's the best way to contribute to this lack of them feeling institutionalized and identified patient-like. Our daughter is getting ready to leave a therapeutic boarding school. Wilderness has been quite a while ago. She is getting close to 18 years old. She is saying she has spent the last year plus doing the time, not the work. Is there any way to tell if this is just meant to push our buttons or if this is actually truthful? I would just ignore it. That's the best way. My response would be, okay. Unfortunate. I mean, the best way to respond to this is to not react to it. Just, okay. We'll see what you get. I mean, she's trying to sell you something. That's the answer. She's trying to sell you something. She's trying to get a reaction. She's trying to punish you for having her in treatment. So my response is, okay, why are you telling me this? And if you ask those questions, if you don't react, you'll find out pretty quickly, very clearly, why she's telling you this. She's resentful and angry and trying to punish you. And if you just let that move through you, you're less likely to contribute to this becoming a fixation of hers. And she gets to be mad, she gets to not like it, and she gets to think you're the worst parent ever. And if you let her feel those ways without defending it, arguing it, trying to talk her out of it, justifying yourself, if you just let it be and say, okay, it'll go away. Because it doesn't then have any teeth. Then it's not serving any purpose. Then it's not giving her the reward that it wants. So my response is, okay. What is there a reason why? How am I supposed to react to that? What would you like me to know? And what are you trying to tell me? And then you'll find out. Our son is 3 months into aftercare program, and the program doesn't appear to provide services for his need. He wants to transition back to our hometown, but is still lacking key life skills. What would you suggest? Find another program. That's a common. If you believe that it doesn't provide services, don't necessarily abandon this level of care. Just find another program that does. Like I said earlier, maybe this question was submitted before I said it, but move to an equivalent but different program, equivalent level of care. If the option for most students, clients, young people, is home or a program, they're going to choose home. So they're going to make a case for it. So if they're making a case that the current program doesn't work, and they're even providing good evidence, and there's some of it's believable, just move them to a different program that you trust. Go back to the drawing board, and don't react quickly. And then watch how the conversation changes. And then again, this goes for all of you. Do your work. Do your work in the ways that I'm describing. What is the best placement after wilderness in your opinion? I can't talk about specific programs. So it's one of the guidelines for the webinars is I'm not qualified in general and very specifically on this webinar to give specific recommendations. Are you talking about students in wilderness program? My child went to your program, then he went to a therapeutic boarding school. He's been there for 15 months, but when he came back home for a short visit, he showed his old behaviors. He was disrespectful and argumentative. Do you expect students in a therapeutic boarding school regress as much as even though they are in long-term care? Yes, you're going to see regression at every level, every stage. Doesn't matter how long, you're going to see it. And hopefully you're fortified and prepared enough to respond differently. And again, it's what people do. It's what human beings do. They test at every level, right? They're going to see. And again, it's not necessarily conscious at all. It's just, are you sure these boundaries are clear? Are you sure you're ready for me? Are you sure the way we've been communicating with these people that have been standing as mediators between us, are you sure that you've internalized it? And that's why the work that we're asking you to do, the reading, the parent portal assignments, the parent workshops, the Al-Anon, the CODA, the therapy, the family therapy intensives, that's why all of that stuff is so important to us. It's the best stuff that you can do to make a difference. By the way, I got a note. The Northern California Parent Support Group is Wednesday, January 27th. Wednesday, January 27th. And the Southern California one will be Monday evening, January 25th. My son, 20, has been through your program, attended aftercare, lived with friends, made in aftercare, moved back home, and is attending college and maintaining a perfect GPA. He has more than 2 years of sobriety under his belt. He's doing great. Thank you, Evoke. But he stopped attending meetings 9 months ago. My concern for him is that he will not have a built-in network if and when things don't go so well. Is pulling away from meetings cause for concern? It's cause for questions, yeah. But the profile that you've given me, this is a perfect example of experimenting with and seeing if I need what people say that I need. I am skeptical of his plan. I am skeptical. I am not enraptured by his ideas. But I'm not surprised, and he'll figure it out. That's my response. And hopefully he doesn't have to fall on his face to figure it out. Hopefully just a stubbed toe or a trip, and he'll figure it out, and he doesn't have to fall on his face and lay there and break his nose to figure it out. But yeah, I'm skeptical. I'm concerned about it. And given everything you've just said, I might just express that, walk away, and then watch and be curious. Our son has been out of treatment for 1 year and is home for Christmas. He has been out several nights with friends, none of which live a sober life. He has also lived with a roommate and does not live a sober life. It went backwards. Sometimes it does that, Michael. Can you put up that other one? Oh, you lost it. Well, I think we're up against the hour. We might have some leftover questions, but we want you to all go to the workshops, January 23rd and 24th. Go to that workshop. If you're still with us, we want you to go. We had one other possible January date, unless I hear from people in the next 24 hours. There were a couple of people that wanted to go to it for the heroic parenting. I'm going to close that unless I hear from anyone in the next 24 hours. Pursuits is our high adventure trip for families and young adults. You can look at our website. We want you to go to 6 of these meetings while you're with us. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. These will also let you know if you're on social media, you'll hear about upcoming events such as parent support groups and so forth. So follow us there. You can get my book on barnesandnoble.com. The last hard copies are available there. On the 19th of this month, it's going to move to paperback on Amazon. All right. My next webinar, I can follow up with any other questions that are left over, Michael. And if we lost your question, you can resubmit it to webinar@drbradreedy.com. We'll get to it on Wednesday. Wednesday, January 6th at 2:16. This really came out of me writing my book. This is kind of the overarching conclusion that I came to when writing my book, was this idea of being an intentional parent. So that's what we're going to talk about on the 6th at 7 p.m. Mountain Time. 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So I hope to see you then. I hope each of these points of context are helpful. I hope tonight's webinar was helpful. Have a great 48 hours, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday. Take care. Bye-bye.